Hello and welcome to the AskALLi Member Monthly Q&A podcast. This is where we answer your questions, your burning self-publishing questions that you have as an ALLi member. I'm your host, Michael Ronn, and I'm joined by Dan Blank. How are you, Dan?
Very good, thank you.
Awesome. Spring has sprung, and it's another episode of the podcast.
Indeed, another blooming of questions.
Yes, we've got quite a few questions this month as well. So if this is your first time joining us, remember that we broadcast every week. ALLi does. This show is monthly, but we do broadcast every week. So be sure to click that subscribe button on whatever you're listening to so that you can get great new content from us every week at ALLi. So why don't we go ahead and jump into the first question?
All right. So the first one is from Kathy, and she asks, if I publish a second edition of my book, do I need to register the copyright again?
That's a good question. So, we get copyright questions quite frequently here at ALLi. And what I would say is it depends on how much you're changing the book. And before I go there, I should say that it depends on what country you're in, depends on all kinds of other factors. So this is a very general, high-level recommendation. Just keep that in mind. But generally, it depends on how much you're changing. So if you're just making a few typo corrections, you probably don't need to issue a new copyright or register a new copyright. If it's, you're doing a second edition of the book and, you're completely renovating it, you're adding new content, you're adding new interviews or new chapters or all kinds of new features that make the book substantially different than what the first edition was, then I think you would be better off to err on the safe side and register another copyright. It probably wouldn't hurt you to do that. But in general, if you're just making minor updates and, changing a few things here and there, you probably don't need to register for a new copyright.
All right. So the next question is from Sue, and she asks, how should I set up my publishing company, a sole proprietor, LLC, limited, etc.? That's part one. And part two is, will my ISBNs transfer to my new company if I previously published them as a sole proprietor / trader?
That's another good question. So there are two questions there. So this is kind of it's an interesting question because it comes up quite a bit, and there's no one size fits all answer, right? So the first question is, is it how do I set up my business? And I think most people tend to start with sole proprietor, or if you're I think in the UK, it's referenced as a sole trader. And that's really just, there's no difference between yourself and the business. You are the business, right? So everything that you do is an extension of the business, but you're taking on all the liability as well. And if you get sued, then you get sued personally. So there's benefits and there's risks, right? With the limited liability company or a limited company, you're creating a company that essentially has a limited amount of liability, but you're separating yourself from the business in a sense. And so I think it's always worth talking to an attorney, a local attorney that, can help you set up businesses, or your accountant, because also there's some tax implications as well. So depending on how much money you're making, it might make sense to go to an LLC. Corporations, this one we didn't mention, probably doesn't make sense for a lot of people unless you're at a point in your career where you're making a decent amount of money and you're maybe hiring people. So I think most people listening to this would probably be having to choose between a sole proprietor and a limited liability company. But I do think that an attorney and an accountant will be able to help you with that. So in order to answer the second question, which is, will my ISBNs be transferred to my new publishing company? Sue was referencing that she, I guess, wants to set up her own publishing company and wants to know if those ISBNs are still valid. And the answer to that would be no. When you purchase your ISBNs, whoever purchases them is listed as the publisher of record, and that cannot be changed. That's irrevocable. So if you did want to issue new editions of the book under the publisher or under your new publishing company, and you wanted your publishing company to be the publisher of record, you would technically have to publish new ISBNs and republish the book as separate editions.
Trying to figure out whether I should call you the Oracle or Yoda. You sort of have all the answers. It's so great.
Oh, you're too kind. I don't know if I'd call myself either of those.
All right. So the next question came in through Facebook. And they ask, what if I get a quality notice from Amazon alleging that my book has too many errors? Help.
Oh yeah, everybody hates those. So these are those little pesky errors that happen when a customer reads your book and clicks a button somewhere that says there's issues with this book. I forget where exactly that button is, but if you're an Amazon user, you know what I'm talking about. So if you get those, sometimes Amazon will send you, or if a customer clicks those, sometimes Amazon will send you what's called a quality notice, where they basically say, we've identified a number of errors in your book. Here's what they are. Please address them as soon as possible. Yada yada yada. There's some other legalese in it that they may threaten to take down your book or something like that. And a lot of people get pretty nervous over it, but it's really not much to be nervous about. If you've hired an editor, if you've hired a proofreader, there's really not much to be concerned about. A lot of times, sometimes I think there's an algorithm behind it as well that will ping some things and return some weird suggestions on things that are errors. It's really just a matter of addressing the errors, communicating with Amazon, and I've never heard anyone have their books taken down because of it. So, like I said, this is one of those things. As long as you're not a knucklehead and you're doing everything right, it's kind of hard to get your books taken down or have any adverse action taken against you. But if there are any errors, you want to make sure that you address those because Amazon takes the quality of its books very seriously, and so they want to make sure that the reading experience is good for the readers as well.
Love it. I think the new title of our podcast should be "As Long as You're Not a Knucklehead." And
Yeah,
then the way that we give the advice.
I haven't had my coffee this yet. I woke up like 30 minutes ago, so I'm in a mood.
All right. The next question came in through Facebook as well. They ask, if I contract a cover designer to do my cover, am I limited to how many books I can sell before having to pay them again?
So I love this question. This is my favorite question this is the question of the week because this is one of those that made me think twice. So generally, most people are not going to sign contracts with a cover designer, right? So the cover designer has a website. Usually they list their terms on the website. You agree to those terms when you hire them. All is good with the world. You get your cover, you move on, you don't think about it. But some people do have contracts with cover artists, and sometimes you have to think about that, right? So if you do have a design, you have to think about your design not just as a design, because it is a design, but you also have to think about the fonts. You also have to think about any special effects, and you also have to think about any of the stock imagery that is in that cover, because each of those things, if a cover designer has gotten them from separate places, are also subject to separate copyrights and separate licenses. So, for example, if you have if you sign a contract with a cover designer and the cover designer says that you sell 1,000 copies of your book, once you do that, you owe me another $50. Then technically you're bound by that contract, right? But you also have to remember that if you have a design that has all those different elements elsewhere, it's probably smart to inquire what those designs are, where the cover artist got them, and what the terms of those are. Because what you don't want is you don't want your cover artist to get a stock image that they maybe only have a license to sell up to 100,000 copies. You become a bestseller, sell 101,000 copies, and then you have a copyright claim against you. So something that you want to think about, right? But most people aren't going to be signing contracts with cover designers. So if you're not, it doesn't necessarily apply to you. But I do think that it's good practice to get in the habit of asking your cover designer where they got their source material and just keeping records of that, making sure that they have the necessary licenses and clearances before they send you the final copy of their design.
Funny, I think a theme in a lot of these questions is having good communication with partners. You mentioned an attorney, an accountant, a cover designer. And it's that idea of really having partners in this, really talking to them, really communicating with them and hashing that out, I think is pretty critical.
Oh, absolutely. And, we at ALLi, we believe that you should be creative directors of your career and that you're not doing it alone. We're the Alliance of Independent Authors, right? But we don't believe that you should be independent. You should have a team around you. And so a team of people that have expertise that you don't can help you go further faster and help you stay out of some trouble.
Love it. All right, next question is, what is the best way to distribute advanced reader copies to readers?
All right, so you've got a book and it's done. You haven't published it yet, and you want to send that book out to some advanced readers so they can, one, either give you feedback or two, point out typos and things like that, or two or three, leave early reviews. So what's the best way to send those to people, right? There's good old email, right? I mean, most people could do that. You could email your copy of your book to advanced readers, but I think most authors have found at this point that it's not always easy unless you're sending a PDF. It's not always easy to educate your readers on how to get their books, how to get your book onto their devices. So that's something that's still not easy yet. So there are a couple of different services that are that can help you do this. So the first is InstaFreebie, and InstaFreebie is basically a service where you can upload your book and then people can download it for free. And there's no charge for the free version, so I think that's the easiest one to use. It's fairly simple, straightforward. You basically you can upload your book to InstaFreebie and then send them a link, and then they can download the book onto their device. Now, the only thing with InstaFreebie is you still have to educate them on how to get it onto their device, but you don't have to worry about hosting the book, and you can send that link out, and the more you promote your book, the more they promote you, and there's some marketing pieces to it as well. InstaFreebie is fantastic and definitely a tool you should look into. But another tool that was designed specifically for this purpose is BookFunnel. And BookFunnel is a service where basically you can upload your book in all your different versions, EPUB, MOBI, and PDF. You can send your readers a link to that book, and then BookFunnel will take care of all of the education and all of the hand-holding that's required when people need to get their books onto their devices. So it's actually really slick. So you send your link out, and so, for example, I had a situation where I had someone who wasn't able to download my book onto their Kindle. And they shot me an email and said, "Hey, I'm having all these issues. Can you help?" I basically just forward that email to an email address at BookFunnel, and literally someone replies, within 24 business hours, and they take care of the person. They hold their hand. They do all the education. They make sure that book is downloaded onto their device, and I don't even need to be involved at that point. And it's just amazing. It's just absolutely amazing. And one of those essential services that I think authors should consider paying for. And it's so cheap that why wouldn't you? But yeah, BookFunnel is great. And another thing that you also want to consider with these services is how much work you want to do troubleshooting and handholding. There is a premium on your time. So before I use BookFunnel, I was just sending the book out to email to all my advanced readers. And that was fine. But what I had to do was I had to create a page on my website. I had to create a YouTube video that showed people how to sideload books onto their devices. And so that took me some additional time. And, depending on people's devices, it didn't always work. And so with a service like BookFunnel, I don't have to worry about that. So I think it depends on how much you're willing to spend, and it's fairly inexpensive, and also how much you're willing to educate people. But InstaFreebie and BookFunnel are good services that you can use.
I love that phrase. You talked about saving time, but I love that phrase you used of, "I don't have to worry about that." I think a lot of us have a difficult time assigning a value to our time, but assigning value to not worrying is pretty profound.
Yes, and it's proven to be a value that people are willing to pay for.
Yes. All right. Next question is, what universal book linking site do you recommend to send readers to their local Amazon site instead of using Amazon.com or .co.uk links every time?
Yes, this is a ninja tip. All right, so you've got a book on Amazon. You want to send it out to people, but you only have an Amazon.com link. If you send an Amazon.com link to someone in Australia or someone in the UK, they're gonna go to Amazon.com, and they're not going to be able to buy it because Amazon is location specific. So how do you send out that what the listener called a universal book link, right? So if someone's located in the UK, it takes them to Amazon.co.uk. If someone is located in Italy, it takes them to the Amazon Italy. If someone's located in Japan, it takes them to Japan. How do you do that in one link without sending out 7 different links to all the different Amazon sites? And so that's what's called a universal book link. And these use what's called geolocation. So basically, wherever you're located, it takes you to wherever site is located in your country. And so there are a couple of different ones out there. Genius Links is one of them. That's a paid option and might not necessarily be the option that a lot of people go with. They're a pretty good service. They, I believe, support Amazon, and they also have some support for Apple, which Apple also offers universal book links, and you have the ability to do that, but it's a little bit more complicated. And I don't know that a lot of people take advantage of it just because of that. So Genius Links is a paid service that will do Amazon and Apple, among a couple other different services. So that's certainly one option. That's the premium option. A better option is BookLinker, and that's a site that I believe you can use for free, and that is Amazon only. And you basically can create your own link, and it will basically serve that purpose as acting as a universal link. And last but not least, and this is the option that I use, and that's Books to Read by our friends at Drafted Digital. So Books to Read is a universal link service. They offer a number of things as well, but they also offer book links. And book links is basically geolocation support. So you enter one link for your book, it generates an Amazon link that is universal, and it also sends readers to a page that has all the other book retailers on it as well. So if you've got someone that only buys books on Kobo, they can basically click and then we'll take in the Kobo. If they only like Amazon, then they can take them to Amazon. And the next time that they click on a Books to Read link, it will automatically take them to the retailer of their choice, which is really nice. And I think Books to Read offers probably the broadest support without having to start paying money. So that's what I would recommend. But there are certainly options out there. There are other options for universal links, but I think BookLinker is the one that would be free and Amazon specific. Genius Links is going to be your premium option. And then Books to Read is the one that I would personally recommend just because they offer a lot of different support. And if you're publishing on Drafted Digital, it's kind of a no-brainer anyway.
All right. So we have one more big question left, but before we get to that.
Yes. So we want to let everyone know, if you have not heard already, if you have not checked your inbox, if you're an ALLi member, ALLi has just published our first quarterly magazine called The Indie Author. So this is really exciting. It's definitely a milestone for us at ALLi. So it's a magazine just like all the magazines you're used to reading, and there's going to be a lot of really good content packed into it every quarter for you. So in our inaugural episode, The Indie Author, Self-Publishing Quarterly, we cover a lot of different things. But inside this issue, there are a couple of different things. So business models for indie authors, 5 steps to a beautiful book, myths and understandings about Amazon. Ooh, that's a good one. Skill up to sell more books. New AskALLi broadcast, that would be us, would be one of them. And then the latest self-publishing news. So there's a lot of information in here. Just another way to get our content if you don't have time to listen to a podcast, or you don't have time to sit in front of our YouTube channel to watch our lovely faces, you can download this PDF onto your tablet or your phone or your computer, and you can read on the go. So just another way for us to spread our message and get our content into the world, and it's available for ALLi members at no additional cost. So definitely take advantage of it, and something that we're very proud of.
All right. Final big question of the day is from Claire, and she asks, how do I price my book?
All right. So Claire was asking specifically how to price her book on ebook and paperback on Amazon. So I'll answer that. But Dan and I like this question because this is a common question that comes up, and it's an ever evolving question. I think the answer to this question would have been different in 2011 versus now in 2018. But I think that there are some principles that will remain true regardless of what year it is. And so we thought this would be a good time to talk about that. So to answer the question at hand, how do I price my book in ebook and in paperback on Amazon? So the commonly accepted practice at this point is that 99 cents is a discount price. So that's what you're going to use when you're discounting your book for sale, or an ad somewhere on a website. 99 cents is going to be a good introductory price. Or if you've got several books in your series, 4, 5, 6 books, and you want to use book one as a loss leader, 99 cents may not be a bad way to go. The only downside on Amazon is you're going to get 35% royalty, right? So you're not going to make a whole lot on it, but you might move more copies in a promotion. $1.99, it's like a wasteland. So most people don't use it anymore. It just seems like there's a lot of data to support that people don't buy at that price point. I don't know. It's not something that I use personally, and it's not something I see a whole lot on the market, but that's still considered to be a discount price. And then the sweet spot is anything between $2.99 and $9.99, at least on Amazon. That's where you get the 70% royalty. It tends to be where Amazon has said that's where, or at least maybe they haven't said it, but that's where the data shows that that's where authors sell the most books. And it might be a lower price point than maybe traditional publishers are charging, but you're selling more books at that lower price point, which is maximizing your profit. So anywhere from $2.99 to $9.99 is that commonly accepted sweet spot on Amazon. The only thing you have to think about after that is, okay, well, should I charge $2.99? Should I charge $3.99? Should I charge $4.99? And I think it's going to depend on the length of your book. It's going to depend on the genre of your book, and it's going to depend on what other authors in your genre are selling your book for, right? Because if you're going to write an urban fantasy and you want to charge $9.99 for it, and every other author in your genre is charging $3.99 or $4.99, I think you're going to have a harder time selling that because, you know, the market has proven that they're not going to buy a single book at $9.99. Doesn't mean that they won't. It just means you'll probably sell fewer of them unless you're selling a box set or you're doing some additional things to add a lot of value to that book that maybe other books on the market don't have. So I think it's important to think about what the market is doing and making sure that you're pricing your books within that sweet spot, but that you're not charging too much and that you're not charging too little. And I think the really the only way to do that is to publish a lot of books and experiment with your pricing over time. And you'll start to find your own personal way on how you should price things. From a paperback perspective, I think it's going to depend on also kind of what the market's doing, but I like to follow the advice that Dean Wesley Smith and that he lays out, which is you want to price your book so that you're making around $2 expanded distribution and create space. And that's basically so that the book looks attractive enough to booksellers to be able to discount it. So you just want to make sure that if that is part of your strategy, right? If you want to get into bookstores, you want to make sure that they have the ability to buy at one, and then you also want to make sure that it's going to be profitable for them to do. And so, like he recommends, right around the $2 mark, expanded distribution for royalties ensures that your book is probably priced adequately as a paperback. But I've seen people use paperbacks as loss leaders as well. So again, it kind of just depends on what you want to do with your paperbacks and kind of what your book strategy is. But those are kind of the best practices for pricing. But we wanted to talk a little bit about the high level too, right? So I think that when a lot of people ask this question, sometimes they start to think about the certain barriers that we have as artists sometimes, where we have this struggle of charging for our work, right, Dan?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's huge, and this is something I deal with, every day with writers and artists I work with, and deal with myself. Obviously, I'm sure that you do because you're a writer. This idea of is my work worth anything? Or even, in the same vein, it's like it needs to be worth this much. And I think a big thing I hear from your answer that's beyond the technical level is that you have to challenge your own assumptions. You have to get out in the market. You've got to talk to people. You've got to experiment. And I think oftentimes people come into this with a mindset. And the mindset that people have around money is very emotional. It's often baked into how we grew up. It's baked into lots of things around money. I've written about this elsewhere, but if there's one course I wish that they taught in high school, it's the emotions of money. And talk about how people make decisions around money that don't make any sense because it feels a certain way. They say, the two ends of this are, I'm not going to charge more than 99 cents because, my book's not really worth it. I'm not really, I don't know if it's any good, and who am I to charge? And the other end is, I've put 400 hours into this. Normally I earn $30 an hour. I should be charging at least $30 for this. And it's like between those two things is a universe.
Oh, it's absolutely. And I think what's often missing sometimes there is just some experience. And what's also missing is just like you said, an understanding of what the market's doing, right? I think at some point you've got to be able to take a cold hard look at what you have and say, okay, I know that I think there's some merit to both sides, right? So there's some merit to being able to say, okay, well, I'm not going to charge any less than this, because I think that that's important to a certain degree, because you don't want to underprice, you don't want to undersell yourself. So to use a separate example, so I used to do consulting, and I charge way too little for it. I didn't charge what I was worth, and I got burned on that real quick. And so you kind of learn at that point that you need to learn how to charge what you're worth, but you don't want to be stubborn about it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think also this is where you have to take a risk and find your path. So one piece of advice I see shared around a lot on social media, because I follow a lot of writers, a lot of designers, a lot of artists, is the idea of, never do anything for free, never do pro bono, because you wouldn't have a carpenter come to your house and ask to do it pro bono. And I see the logic there. And it's not that I disagree with that, but I talked to many, many, many creative people who said, you know what, I did this job and I barely got paid anything. But you know what? I had this last week or the other week, I interviewed an artist and they did a job for a big company. And they said, I mean, I got paid very, very little. I don't want to say the number here, but because they asked me, it boosted my confidence 1,000%. That took me to a new level internally. Also, it gave me an incredible amount of promotion, and I got a contact from it. And I think that there's no universal rule around this. And I think that often we look for one. We want, when people ask some of these questions, they want you to make it easy for them. And you're giving this incredible experience and advice, but in the end, you're alone in a room and you've got to go click on that price and no one's going to make it 100% safe for you. And I think the biggest problem a lot of people have is not making a choice and not getting the experience because they're trying to make it perfect right away because they don't want to be quote unquote stupid by making a foolish decision. And I'll say, I mean, from my experience, I've made 1,000 foolish decisions and thank goodness I did because it's the only way I can move ahead.
No, I love that, and and we haven't even gotten into the perma-free discussion, right? Should you even give your book away for free? You were saying that, and I think that there are varying answers and varying opinions and varying emotion levels on that. I think that free as a long-term sustainable pricing tool, probably not the greatest decision, right? But there are some authors who have benefited quite well from offering first books free in a series. Will it work for you? Maybe. Maybe it's something you could consider. Just remember that what you don't want to do is you don't want to train your readers to get things for free. That they're going to expect things from you for free. I think almost everyone can universally agree on that. If you want to make money, don't train people to take things for free because you're going to have a really hard time later on monetizing, your products. So that's something you have to think about. But perma-free, not a bad choice. Just remember that we are artists and we do, in order for us to continue making art, we do have to make money. And so if you're going to do perma-free, I think you just have to have a smart strategy around what you're going to do to make up for all those people that are not paying for your book. Are you hoping to get more contacts like Dan mentioned in his example with the contractor? Are you hoping to build value in a list? That's a really smart way to do it. And a lot of the authors that built their careers on perma-free did it because they had lists that they could send people to, right? Or is there some other way that you can get creative? Are you sending them to Patreon, or do you have a YouTube channel that you're monetizing? You have to think about that, right? You don't want to just use free as the only way to do something.
Yeah, and I think that, and we don't have to go too far down this rabbit hole, but the idea, if you're looking at the idea of your writing career and how you will earn money, you realize that typically there are a variety of ways that a professional writer earns money. We often want to look at the example of the author who writes a book, and 100% of their earnings is selling that book. And that's romantic for many of us. That is not the case for a lot of people, or it's not the case of the journey getting there. And I think that when you look at that, you start looking at a very typical marketing funnel, which is the idea that something is just to grow awareness of who you are, and that stuff is free or cheap. And then there's another level, and then there's another level, and then there's a level at the bottom, which is where you either want to take people to where it's really where you really earn the money, and that's a smaller number of people often. But it's this thing where you think very critically about how you will earn money and the different facets of what you need in your career. And pricing is one part of that. And it depends on what kind of author and what kind of audience, what kind of books that you write as well.
Absolutely. Well said, Dan. And I think we're coming up on time. So we'll leave it at that. But we want to thank you guys for listening to the show this week, and please subscribe if you found this episode helpful, and that way you can get new episodes into your podcast listener of choice every week from Dan and I and the other great folks at ALLi. This has been the AskALLi Member Monthly Q&A podcast. I've been Michael Ronn, and this has been Dan Blank, and we'll see you guys next time.